Hello everyone and welcome to another News Coolum video. I'm here at a BP Pulse charging site here in Corning, California. It's at a Petro travel plaza, and I'm just trying to get back into the groove of things. And speaking of grooves, let's not try to have Torx screws in the parking lot. I've had enough issues with flat tires recently. But anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about this site and kind of get my sea legs back and do a site review. Now, it's going to be difficult for me to go back and forth with the scores, so I'll make sure to put everything on screen in terms of how well this site scored. So just the gist of it, right? These are the big BP Pulse travel plaza sites. I actually, went to one on Highway 99 in Livingston, which is much farther down in the state in California. This one is on I-5 in Northern California, in Corning, California. There's not a whole lot here. And in the site review, some of you might say, well, there is a charger in Corning, because I gave this bonus points for being in an incorporated area that doesn't currently have any public charging. There's a ChargePoint charger, a 24 kilowatt charger that used to be online years and years ago. It hasn't been online for a long time. I'm not counting that. And there's also a Tesla supercharger, but the Tesla supercharger, as far as I understand, is only a V2 supercharger, which means it's still a private charger. It's not a NACS charger, it's the Tesla standard. So this site kind of stands alone here in Corning. And then there's, of course, another BP Pulse site like this that I will visit soon at a TA travel plaza that's in Redding. So about 50 miles-ish north on the freeway. That's why I also gave this a point for having another charging site by this same charging provider within 50 miles of this site. So there are some good and bad things about this site. I'll just say, to start with, I had some trouble when I got here. One of the payment readers is not working, and it happens to be at the stall that's also with the ADA compliant. So there's a van access parking, and then there's another parking stall. And this is where I kind of push back on BP Pulse's design philosophy for right now. They're overemphasizing, in my opinion, the NACS cable connectors. These Tesla standard connectors, they're overemphasizing that standard, in my opinion. And what you end up with right now, even though there are 6 400 kilowatt Alpitronic chargers at this site, only 2 of them are CCS1. And so that means that the other 4 are only NACS. Now, I do have an adapter, but I've been hit or miss with it working, and I don't want to have to break it out just to use these chargers. So I tried to use the CCS. The CCS I'm currently on was being used by a Mach-E at the time I arrived, so I didn't want to, encroach on them. So unfortunately, I picked the one charger in the entire complex where the Petro terminal was not working. So they do have an app, but I'm not really interested in that. If I can't get one of these chargers working with a credit card at the point of sale, then I'm going to ding them for that, because this is a California requirement. Hasn't yet spread to California or outside of California as a national requirement yet. But for me, if you can't get that right, then you've already got problems. Luckily, I checked all of the other units. All 5 of the other Petro terminals appear to be working, so it was just that one unit. But again, this also kind of emphasizes this site gets credit because it has an ADA compliant charging stall. The problem is it is only serviced by CCS1. So another drawback of not mixing and matching the handles on the same unit. And with that Petro terminal down, it means that the only ADA compliant stall in this entire complex is currently unavailable unless you have the app or you can call in. So it's a major inconvenience if you're driving a NACS-based vehicle then it's an inconvenience, and if you're wanting to pay by credit card, it's an inconvenience. So having only one ADA stall and having that one be down, that's a problem. Like I said, it's just general too. I'd like to see a mix and match across the board and slightly less of an emphasis on NACS, at least for the time being. I also went through and checked the different meters on these heads, and it kind of validated what I was thinking. So the charger that was down had low usage, less than 400 kilowatt hours dispensed, or less than 500 kilowatt hours dispensed from the entire unit. And that's likely due to the payment reader being down, but it was still as high as a couple of the NACS only units. And in fact, the most used unit is, of course, the CCS1 unit that is operational. So I think BP Pulse is missing out on an opportunity here to kind of draw in some of the non-Tesla traffic. Unfortunately, until more automakers start issuing their cars with NACS native, which we are seeing more of, I think they're going to see less usage out of these 4 dedicated stalls for NACS than they are out of the 2 CCS1 stalls. And that's just my my note to BP Pulse if they're looking or if they're listening. The other thing is too, another big letdown is, yes, we saw these massive columns go in, and thinking they might be for some sort of a shading, some sort of a canopy. As you can probably tell, I am not shaded, I am not canopied. At least they put lights in, right? So this should be a well-lit site. I'll visit it again at nighttime just to confirm, but it looks like it's very well lit. But yeah, those columns are solely for lights. So there's some good and some bad things. Nice thing is this is 3,000 amp service here, so this is not an oversubscribed station. This is right about right for having this many, 400 kilowatt chargers. You're looking at basically a 2.4 megawatt output site. And yeah, everything else is pretty good. Because of the lack of things like pull-through parking, there's not really any on-site trash cans or squeegees or that type of amenities, so it doesn't get those points. So it does get dinged for a bit, but even lacking those because of the proximity to the freeway and the importance of this site, it's still getting a C score, right, on the, and then with the bonus points, it's actually getting a B. So it's a very strong site, a good showing, and I think just right for this region of Northern California. But I mean, I'd like to see a little bit more out of BP Pulse again, but for an area that's been so underserved, this is already good enough.
Okay, so let's go over the site score. I'm doing this off-site because I want to, well, there's some additional explanations and some caveats when grading this site, and I just wanted to speak to those a little bit more clearly and after having double-checked some of the information. But in terms of access, this site does very, very well. In fact, it almost aces the access category simply by the nature of it. It has the ADA compliant stalls, it has the effective cable management, which is going to be true for Alpitronics just kind of universally with their armature, though I did have difficulties with the one that wasn't working. Somehow or another the armature got reversed, and I just didn't take time to see if I could fix it, but it was definitely torquing the cable on my car that was preventing communication. So I would need to double check that, see if that can be fixed. But just generally speaking, the HYC400s are pretty good when it comes to cable management. The parking enforcement, again, this is something that if there is signage, technically someplace like California, if there's signage and you're blocking a charger with a car that isn't plugged in and charging, then you can get towed. That's just, under California. Different states, different jurisdictions will have different laws, but my sort of minimum bar for this is, is there signage? Are the stalls painted as EV for charging only? That sort of thing. And this meets that minimum requirement. The chargers are right next to the entrance. Basically, they're closer to the entrance to this facility, this Petro, than the gas pumps are. So it's really convenient to get in. You're also literally just right across from the restaurant and the services, the store inside. So it's just right there. It's a very compact overall travel plaza. You're right off of the highway and interstate. And I'll get into this into the another section, but technically this is on Highway 99. The reason there's no score for like an intersection of highway and interstate is because Highway 99 and Interstate 5 run parallel to each other. But you're right there. You're literally just off the main drag, so to speak, as well as the interstate. They do have point of sale payment options. Again, this is a requirement in California, so this is a score that you maybe won't see until I start doing a little bit more traveling outside of California. Then I might run into more stations that don't have this as an option. And then, of course, there's the option for app, phone, web, or plug-in charge. So far, I don't know of anything about BP Pulse doing plug-in charge, but we should be maybe looking for that to come sometime in the future. And then sufficient stalls for the site and size, or popularity of the location. Yeah, this is also, it nailed that just because this is a very large installation for Northern California, and it's appropriate for just the overall location. Now, I did arrive here in what I would consider probably a slow time of the day, and there were just not a whole lot of people using this facility. The restaurant was empty, the store was empty, the lot was mostly empty. So maybe during busier times, but like I said, in Northern California, you're talking about just a less populated area, a less traveled section of Interstate 5, and 12 stalls is a really big implementation, especially when it's 12 split power 400 kilowatt stalls. So the only one that this didn't get a point for was the pull-through stalls. You could probably take up some additional parking spaces, but you're going to be blocking someone. Yeah, they do need, I think, a separate pull-through stall location. Otherwise, you're just not going to get a point for this category. Now for amenities, and this is where it scored really, really poorly, but I feel like some of this might be overly negative on my part, and so I wanted to put a couple of asterisks in here so you can kind of judge for yourself. First, there is no canopy or covering for the chargers. That's non-negotiable. They didn't get that point. Kind of a disappointment because even now in March, it's kind of hard to read the screens. We're having unusually hot weather. But still, during summertime, it's going to be oppressively hot, and it's going to be very hard to see the screens. The cables and the screens are going to be hot. The buttons on the charger are going to be hot to the touch. So, and then of course, wintertime, you could easily be getting rained on. So yeah, it would have been nice to have them put some sort of a covering over these chargers, but it doesn't have it. Now, where those columns were, they did put overhead lighting, and it looks like it's going to be pretty bright lighting. So again, I need to swing by at nighttime just to confirm, or maybe early morning before the sun's come up, and then I'll be able to double check and verify. So the lighting looks sufficient. There is 24/7 bathroom access. It is a travel plaza. That's one of the benefits. Now, where it missed points here is there are no trash cans or squeegees next to the charger. Now, a lot of times I will still give this a point if there's some sort of a proximity, right? Like if you're talking about just walking onto the other, side of the drive path to pull a squeegee or paper towels or a trash can from the gas pumps, then that's one thing. But in this case, the gas pumps are literally on the other side of the facility. So if you want to count that, that's fine. Technically, there are squeegees there are gas cans, but you are going to be walking the entire distance across the facility to get to them. So yeah, I didn't count that. And then in terms of on-site security, I also added a bonus point for having on-site staff. And so I do think security needs to be considered separately from staff. We're talking about someone whose job it is to just make sure that the people there are safe and the equipment is safe. And so there is an attending, but they're not security. So it's not like you're completely alone, but it's not like you have someone there whose role is to ensure your safety. So that's, again, maybe a subjective category. Now, they do have dining options, right? The sit-down iron skillet restaurant. They have snack and drink options inside the inside the store. They do not have a park picnic pet area though. So, I mean, there's room around, but there's nothing like dedicated tables or chairs or anything at this location. So it doesn't get that point. And then in terms of novelty, there's not really anything here that's novel about this location. It's literally just a travel plaza off of an interstate. It's very utilitarian. It's very important, but it doesn't have anything that you would say, oh, wow, this is making it special or a special kind of stop. It's literally, this is a place that you would stop if you needed to refuel, and there's not a whole lot of other reasons beyond that. And then, of course, just the convenience of having a restaurant and services there while you refuel. But outside of that, there's no sort of novelty to this location. So sort of a disappointing amenities score, but you know, it's 4 out of 10. And then, like I said, you could maybe score it as high as a 6 out of 10 just based on having the squeegees and the trash cans on the other side of the facility. Now for concentration, this site nailed it. This site, you know, got 10 out of 10, no notes, and just walking through, of course, these are cumulative from 2 charging stalls up to 12 charging stalls, and you get a point for each. After that, though, the reason I don't give additional points is because there are diminishing returns. Once you get to 12 active charging stalls, in my opinion, you've saturated that specific location. And what you should be looking to do at that point is to add another charging location nearby, right? And rather than just piling on more and more charging stalls into an individual location, that doesn't really benefit customers or consumers. Yes, there's a slight possibility that all 12 charging stalls are occupied, and there's an inconvenience related to then moving on to another charging location that's nearby. But I think that the benefit of having a secondary location nearby, you know, overshadows that. So perfect score in terms of, you know, 12 out of 12 charging stalls, and that's going to be common for these BP Pulse TA Petro Travel Plaza sites. Now, I also, in terms of number of stalls appropriate for the location or for the site, yes, like, again, I talked about this. I think this particular type of travel plaza in this region, 12 charging stalls is more than sufficient. And then for the route, again, this is an interstate, and I-5 is by far the busiest interstate for EV traffic. However, this section of the interstate is probably the least traveled of that corridor. So from Seattle down to San Diego, this 300 to 400 mile stretch, say from Sacramento to Medford or Oregon, is probably the least trafficked section of the freeway. So having 12 chargers for this route is more than appropriate. For the region, it's more than appropriate. And then in terms of the site being supported by other sites from the same provider in the region. And I give this example of 50 highway miles. The Reading TA Travel Plaza for BP Pulse is actually only 40 something miles to the north. So there's already support, and then of course it's a little bit farther to get down into Sacramento, but that's where you'll see some of the Arco BP Pulse locations that are now starting to use the Alpitronic HYC400s. So those add on, again, additional support from this provider along this stretch of corridor. Now, in terms of the location, I consider this a very good travel location and a very important location where it went in. But it actually, scored surprisingly low in this, 5 out of 10. So this is something that's indicating to me that maybe I should reconsider how this is scored, because right now location is kind of split in terms of importance, halfway between what would be an important travel location versus what would be an important city location. And so, is it within a mile of the interstate? Yes, it is. Is it within half a mile? Yes, it is. Is it within a quarter mile of the interstate? Yes, it is. So in terms of just access from the freeway, this is absolutely a great travel location just off the interstate. Now, the thing with Corning is it is not on a highway interstate interchange, right? There's no significant highway east-west going through Corning. There are some roads, right, that go that way, but Corning is really just sort of on Interstate 5, and there's no principal intersection or interchange that's going east-west. So it doesn't really get any of those points, and it's on a historic highway route, right? Highway 99 is technically a historic highway route, but it's really more, it's not scenic in any way. It's not really known in the, I guess, the more common sense of being historic. It's historic in that it's old, but you're not going to be traveling it necessarily to go sightseeing. Maybe farther north for Highway 99, but not this section of California. It's more of an access road than it is a scenic or historic highway route. And then, of course, the 50 miles from the nearest public charger from any provider, while this is adding and enhancing, it really isn't changing that much in terms of the travel dynamic, because there is a Pilot Flying J just to the south. There are a number of other chargers in Red Bluff to the north. So you have Orland and Willows has an Electrify America. So there's a number of other public chargers along this route within 50 miles or so either direction. So it's not a crucially important, but it's a significant upgrade over the chargers that are currently available along this route. And then in terms of in an incorporated area with no other fast chargers, it actually did get points for this, because the Tesla supercharger that's just down the road is a V2, so it's not a public charger. And then there is the ChargePoint CPE 124 kilowatt that at the Olive Pit that has not been open for years. So this really is the first public fast charger in the city of Corning. And then in terms of an incorporated area with fewer than one public fast charging stall per 1,000 residents, and I just put a note here because Corning has 8,000, or approximately 8,000 residents at this point. The number also here isn't by accident, just using the assumptions that 20 to 30% of the population live in a home that cannot access charging. Then you would, just breaking that down, you would want approximately one charging stall per 1,000 residents to ensure that if those residents need access to a charger during the week, there would be enough access potential for them to get it. So it passes that as well. So 5 out of 10 for location. And then in terms of Now, in terms of speed, again, this almost aces it. This is an update to this Newscoolum site review scoring model where I've added the 500 kilowatt or greater. And the reason for that is we're seeing Tesla finally, outputting their V4, their true V4 chargers. You have Alpitronic, the HYC400s coming. Delta is working on a 500 kilowatt or faster charger that we'll likely see from EVgo. So that is the next expectation in terms of peak charging speeds. So these HYC400s are going to fall a little bit short of that. And then in terms of the 4 megawatt or greater site power, it also falls short of that. And this is one of those things where I feel like for a travel plaza, in my opinion, at this point, 2 megawatt or greater is sort of the bare minimum for a busy travel plaza location. And most of the chargers right now on interstates don't really meet that standard. So already hitting that 2 megawatt or greater power standard puts this BP Pulse travel locations way ahead of the curve. So I don't see any shame at all in a 8 out of 10 charger. But if we were looking at those massive travel hubs, and like I said, again, we're going to start seeing more likely the 600 kilowatt and faster charging speeds. At that point, you are going to expect a 4 megawatt or greater site power, right? If you were going to do 600 kilowatt chargers, you're already looking at 3.6 megawatts of total site power. So that 4 megawatt is somewhat aspirational, but it's also based on the expectation that we're going to eventually see faster than 500 kilowatt charging for these travel locations. Now, the bonus, the BP Pulse kind of cleaned up on the bonus category in terms of just a lot of these are just additional points based on amenities that might be available or services that might be available. So they have built-in, multiple plug standards available. I still don't like the distribution of them, but at least they have them. So it's both the NACS and the J3400 and the CCS1. There is no CHAdeMO, but we're seeing less and less of that, especially with the Alpitronics. The charging stall status is displayed. I gave it a yes here because the Alpitronics do show on the sort of LED ring around the unit. So it is pretty straightforward to see. It's not well lit in sun. Again, another reason to have a canopy, but you can tell which units are available and online. Now, charging station is not indoors. It's out in the open. Now, they also get the CPO owns or leases the property, right? These Petro locations fall under the BP Pulse umbrella. So this is their location. They own it. They are the ones that are responsible for this hardware. And this will have long-term effects in terms of availability and access and reliability. So this is a point that a lot of CPOs aren't going to get. There is no level 2 AC charging available, so it doesn't get that point. There's no on-site battery, there's no on-site solar, but there is on-site support staff, so it does get that point. Again, not security, but on-site staff. And the site is not oversubscribed. It's got a 3,000 amp, 480 volt, three-phase service, which is roughly 2.4 megawatts, which matches almost identically the 6 400 kilowatt stalls. So it's perfectly balanced, as all things should be. And then the Wi-Fi, I did put a little asterisk here just because it is limited to the restaurant, but the Petro Travel Plaza locations do have Wi-Fi available for guests. So that's 8 out of 10 for the bonus. And this is why I said the total site score was 36 out of 50 without the bonus. So that's a sea-level site, and it's mostly due to the amenities. And then, of course, it's a total with the bonus of 44. Again, it's a B site, so it kind of cleaned up on the bonus, and like I said, it just nailed concentration and access. So and speed, it did pretty good on speed too. So back to the site.
So anyway, I'd love to hear what you think. Is this a site that you would use on your travels? You know, they have an on-site restaurant, and then they have regular convenience store, travel amenities, things like that. So overall, it's a solid site. I think with the bonus points, a B score is fair, but they would need to up their game just a little bit to get it to an A. And then again, there are just some fundamental things that I dislike about the BP Pulse site design, how they've chosen to allocate standards and distribute them, and then, you know, of course, things like canopies and pull-through parking. But anyway, I'd love to hear what you think. Is this a site that you would use when traveling, heading through Northern California? And as always, thank you for watching.